Hello, everyone. Welcome again to an Affirmative Right Roundtable podcast. My name is Andy Nowicki. I am the quote-unquote editor at large at present for Affirmative Right. With me, as always, is my partner in thought crime, Colin Liddell, the editor-in-chief of Affirmative Right, and also our mutual friend from down under, Richard Wolstencroft. Well, a lot has happened recently, to say the least, and Colin had this idea we should maybe talk about some of the stuff that's happened lately.
My God.
Colin, where do you think we should start?
Well, yeah, there's, the whole world seems to be going through some kind of weird metamorphosis at the moment. And I think the big question really is, on the one hand, everything's becoming very, very woke, and everybody's sort of signaling about Black Lives Matter and how we have to finally address the problems of racism and pull down all the statues and rewrite history and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot going on, and the corporate world seems to be fully on board. The media seem to be fully on board. Most of the big politicians seem to be fully on board. And the big question, I think, is like, how real is this? How deep does this go? Is this just a big astroturf operation? Is this just like the biggest example of gaslighting ever in human history? Or is this actually something that is pulling the normies along with it? And if so, to what degree? And will there actually be any kind of backlash or resistance to this? Or will this just keep going? That's the big question, I think.
Well, look, I'd like to say a couple of things. I think this is our first podcast for 2020. Maybe we did one in January, but it's good to be with you, and it's good to make June 2020 and still be alive, boys, because this is clearly the year from fucking hell, or what, isn't it? I mean, we've got to remember we've had this coronavirus going since January, and that only began to go away. And as soon as it began to fade in Australia. It was still sort of going in America. Then the elite decided to start the race riot almost immediately. I mean, we went from living in the USSR kind of situation where we're all under lockdown, and then within a week we're in 60s race riots. You know what I mean? It was absolutely extraordinary example of like elite manipulation. I've never seen anything like it. And it's all targeted at Donald Trump. It's all targeted at the 2020 election. And you are right. Are the normies going along with it? I think some are to a certain extent. But I think, things like riots and looting and stuff, it has actually an amazing kind of conservative backbone. I've noticed a lot of left-wing people, because I'm still on Facebook, unlike you two gentlemen who got the boot. But I've noticed amongst left-wingers, they're very nervous about this, basically anyone's house can be looted and burnt to the ground in this crisis. And I don't know, I think there could be a conservative backlash in amongst all this woke bullshit. But, we all know the media is just pushing this thing like it's 60 social movements, but it's not like that at all. There's been a lot of people who've been killed since the George Floyd, which was a terrible incident. I mean, I was not a fan of what happened to that guy, but then what's happened since has been far worse, far, far worse. And there's over 20 people have died, probably more than that now, probably 30 or 40. And how many businesses have been looted? How many houses have been burnt to the ground? I mean, it's absolutely shocking what's been going on.
Yeah, well, as far as the question of how much of it is real and how much of it is astroturfed, I think my impression is that it's enormously been astroturfed.
Yes.
I've been outspoken about that, and also about the virus crisis, which I've
read your articles. They're great, and you're spot on about it. It's all fake. I mean, it seems like we didn't need to lock down at all, and it seems like the thing to do in relation to George Floyd was to arrest the cop who did it, and maybe the other three cops is maybe what's it called, someone who helps the incident, or at least didn't do enough to stop it. And that's the end of it. That's what should have happened in the normal situation. But no, the media have kicked off the race riot, and God knows what they've got planned for July. I think China's going to invade Taiwan or something like that. I don't know.
Well, it raises a lot of questions about, as you say, what's real and what isn't. And as far as the reaction to it, there's an awful lot of virtue signaling going on right now. But there's also a backlash that is lurking. And there's been this revulsion against the kind of images that we see of people getting down on their knees. I mean, I'm not a rah law enforcement kind of guy, but these images of the like these rioters and looters, these violent hooligans doing their thing, and these cops going in their midst, and then all getting down on their knees in front of them. It just revulses me. It makes me so angry, and I found that others have had the same kind of reaction to it. That there's this like,
it's enough to make you like the police. I've never been a huge law and order guy myself, but I mean, obviously, I do respect the role of the police, and I really think, I posted a fucking blue square on fucking Facebook to support the police because I think it's shocking the kind of attacks they've been under. What do you think of all this, Colin?
Well, I think we've seen scenes. I think probably the most famous scene was in London, where actually, London's a perfect example because we've got the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, which they had, I think, a week ago, and then a day or two ago, you had the Football Lads Alliance march to kind of protect these statues. And it's so obviously different the way they policed one event and the way they policed the other. At the first event, they were wearing their soft caps. They were trying to be personable, chatting with the demonstrators. And at one point, they kind of joined in with this kind of taking a knee thing that a lot of people are doing. And they were taking a very softly approach. They were allowing one young black rioter to climb up onto the cenotaph, which is this almost semi-sacred war memorial in Whitehall. Yeah. And he was actually quite calmly trying to set fire to the flags. And he probably would have succeeded if they hadn't been made of a non-flammable material. And I'm not sure how long he was allowed to stay up there. I never saw any pictures of him being yanked down or even coming down. So contrast that with the Football Lads Alliance, and there the barriers are up, the metal helmets are on, the truncheons are out, the mace is ready, and it's a completely different scenario. The first Black Lives Matter demonstration, this was described as a largely peaceful demonstration, and this is a demonstration that put 27 police officers in hospital. Just the way the media kind of chime in and really downplay any leftist or BLM violence. And then, as we see with the Football Lads Alliance, they are desperate to find any negative image they can. I mean, they were so actually hard-pressed to find a really negative image. They focused on this guy having a piss next to a memorial to a police officer who died trying to protect the Houses of Parliament against a black Muslim terrorist about a couple of years ago. And this guy became the big villain. And apparently, he turned himself in because there was so much social media attention on him. And he was sentenced, I think, to a couple of weeks in jail.
Well, an exact parallel can be drawn, or a nearly exact parallel can be drawn to here in the United States. While the lockdown was in effect, especially in some of the states with the governors who ruled most draconianly, or in the most draconian manner, such as Michigan, Governor Whitmer has become rather notorious. And other places as well, there were demonstrations against the lockdown, and these were treated in the media with scorn and like, oh, they're being so irresponsible, and they're going to spread this disease and kill grandma and stuff. And these were these were peaceful marches. They were, vociferous. They were passionate, but there was no violence that took place, and it wasn't an enormously huge demonstration where you think, oh, they're spreading disease everywhere or anything like that. Whereas after the George Floyd demonstration / riots kicked off, I mean, there were thousands of people suddenly crowding together in very close quarters, violating all of the rules that we were told, the CDC and all the authorities were, all the especially blue state governor type of people were wagging their fingers at us, saying, "Don't do this, don't stay in your house, stay 6 feet apart from other people, wear a mask, or else you're a bad person and you're going to kill old people."
Wasn't that ridiculous? The way that we were in kind of lockdown still. I mean, it was we were kind of coming out of lockdown a bit in the stages. I think we're in stage 3 in Australia, but it was a lot more stringent still overseas. And then all of a sudden, it went from, basically stay in your homes, and then And then everyone telling you to stay in your homes is now telling you to go out and protest in a race riot. And exactly
Yeah,
what...
it's okay. It's okay as long as you're demonstrating or rioting for Black Lives Matter. Then it's okay to violate all of these stringent rules that we've put forth and said, if and been very stern about before and very self-righteous about, and said, if you break these rules, you're a bad person. Now it's suddenly okay, and you see Governor Whitmer, and you see all these, of course, hypocrisy with these people is nothing new. They were violating the lockdown even when the lockdown was in effect. They're like all the way down to that guy Ferguson, the forecaster of all these doomsday scenarios, and you found out that he was violating the lockdown, seeing his lover who was married. Even when he had tested positive for the virus himself, there were all kinds of other politicians and media types who were the same kind of hypocrites. But this was hypocrisy on a mass scale.
No, let me have a talk for a minute, because we've got to watch talking over each other. So yeah, look, I agree also with what Colin was saying in relation to the way that the media portrays the different kinds of protesters. I mean, for example, in Melbourne, Australia, we had a kind of freedom protest about a week before we had our own Black Lives Matter protest. That was like people who were doubted what we were being told about, basically people who are a bit conspiracy minded. There were people on the far right, on the far left, and also libertarians, some anarchists even. A magazine like The Guardian was called them dickheads doing dickhead stuff. That was 1 week before. Then the Black Lives Matter thing, and we had our own Black Lives Matter protest down under. And then, of course, everyone's like, go out and protest. The Guardian's like, oh, don't worry about COVID. There are some things that are more important. You know what I mean? So it's just the level of media bullshit on this is extraordinary. And, I think I wanted to mention something to you boys. Have you seen this book? It's called The War for Eternity. It's a book on Alexander Dugin and Steve Bannon and their politics. What I think we're seeing this year is a kind of battle for eternity. And you remember when Trump won in 2016, I think we did a famous podcast where I declared, I think the new right, took over the universe or whatever. Well, we sort of ruled the universe for 3 or 4 years, but now there's a clear fight to whether we continue to maintain control of the universe. And I think we're in a battle for eternity. That would be a good name for this theme. So that's all I wanted to say, because I think it's extraordinary the way that the media has behaved, the way that we're told one thing from the one exact group 1 minute, and then we're told a complete other load of bullshit the next. Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, that would suggest that we haven't really been in charge for the last 3 years. We've had absolutely no power on social media or in the mainstream media. There's been a bit of a populist upsurge with Trump getting in and Brexit. But even there, it hasn't really been everything it was cracked up to be. You know what I mean? So
sure, of course.
But who's in charge really? Is anybody really in charge? Because I know people have a tendency at times like this to believe all sorts of interesting theories about what's really going on and who's really pulling the strings. And theories like that do seem plausible when you look at how concerted the establishment can be. It's like I've mentioned before, with the way the police behaved in such a two-faced way, the way the media behaves in such a two-faced way. You get somebody like Boris Johnson, who's supposed to be on the right wing, coming out and denouncing right-wing thugs, when these are not right-wing thugs in London. These are just like really normal working class guys who like a bit of football, who probably support a lot of black players, but who are proud of their country and who like a bit of their history. They're just normal people, you know what I mean? And they're denounced almost automatically as right-wing thugs because they were standing up to these extreme left-wing thugs who want to completely do a Pol Pot on the entire history of Britain. So
it's extraordinary, isn't it? It is extraordinary the way that they're like the Red Guard. And this is a kind of Western cultural revolution. And it happens, too, at a time when China has just already essentially sabotaged all the economies of the Western world. I mean, it does seem like it's some kind of Maoist cultural revolution that's being played out by Western actors.
Yeah, but then that sounds like China is in cahoots with our so-called, sinister elites, and it's just too much of a sprawling, overloaded conspiracy theory. So I'm one of the people who think that nobody is really in charge. The world is too complicated. There's too many interest groups whose interests diverge, and sometimes they converge, and then sometimes they diverge. And so there's nobody really in charge. And what we're seeing are a lot of blind processes surging through the world. And I think there are some countries like maybe China, you could say that there they have a kind of a very centralized cadre of people who run the country and who take a long-term view and who have successfully built China up into a more powerful country, more economically powerful, more militarily powerful. The Chinese are also starting to acquire more soft power, more cultural power. They're developing their overseas news service, their cable channels, and so on. And you're starting to see the spread of Chinese influence and power into a variety of countries. This coronavirus epidemic, it actually set China back as well, because, I mean, in the case of the UK, Britain was all ready to sign up to Chinese 5G, courtesy of Huawei. And this is now being derailed by, the controversy about how China has handled the coronavirus.
Well, they've shot themselves in the foot, haven't they, Colin? I mean, I think, obviously when you release something like a bioweapon, and obviously we're not entirely certain it was released on purpose. Obviously, the general feeling at the moment is that it came from the Wuhan lab. It could have been an accidental leak. But, due to the amount of globalist kind of shenanigans before, like the Bill Gates thing that he did at Johns Hopkins University, and people like Anthony Fauci had predicted that there would definitely be some kind of pandemic before the Trump term one had played out. This kind of thing is very suspicious. Now, I mean, to me, the big geopolitical picture it looks like this. The globalists, and we all know who that roughly is, it's a bunch of rich, multi-millionaires and very powerful people from all over the world, multi-ethnic, have collaborated with China, and China is their main ally because the one thing the globalists don't have is an army. They may control our media, they may control our political class, they may control our big business class. They exist at chokeholds. That's the way to best think about the globalists. They exist at chokeholds in our societies, the legal system and stuff. But they don't have an army, right? So they need some kind of like bully boy army, and that's China as far as they're concerned. But obviously this plan is insane, what they're attempting to do, which is destroy Western civilization and give power to China. That's the basically overarching geopolitical picture as far as I can see it. Now, there isn't actually another cabal that's facing them. And that's basically, obviously, it's not you, the three of us, but in a sense, we kind of represent it in a way, like the nationalist cabal, which represents the traditional way that the world has run for the last, I don't know how many hundreds of years. People live in nations, our whole structure of our democracies, our economies are based around nations. So people are, in a sense, inside a nationalist cabal, whether they know it or not. So I believe that this is the kind of geopolitical struggle. And for example, someone like Putin and Alexander Dugin and all that school, they come from the kind of nationalist school, and so do many other countries in Eastern Europe. And Trump obviously represents that. And obviously Boris Johnson is someone who, to a certain extent, represented nationalism, but also is half a globalist, if you know anything about his background, and also the kind of way he keeps giving mixed messages. So that's the kind of geopolitical struggle, or the battle for the universe, as I like to call it, or the battle for eternity, that I see playing out before me at the moment.
So you're saying that there are some globalists in the West who are siding with China and hoping to use the Chinese army, and then there's some globalists in the West who are maybe looking to control the world in the way it was formerly controlled, centered on the American empire and the American military. So you're seeing two globalist cliques at war with each other. Is that right?
Well, it's not. No, I would describe. There would be some globalists involved in the nationalist cabal. I mean, the nationalists that would include probably our armies. I think in the final analysis, our armies are going to side with us, and so will our police force, particularly after this fucking Black Lives Matter fucking nightmare. You know what I mean? One thing about this is really woken the police up to things like politics. I mean, they're taking the knee and they're doing shit like that, but they've got to go out on the day to day, and they all know where the crime comes from in our communities, and they all know it's always the ethnic communities are way overrepresented and stuff. So I mean, I think it's very interesting what's going on, and it's interesting to take a step back and to look at the large geopolitical picture of it all. I think there's two sides, good and evil, so to speak. That the evil side is the globalists in China, and the good side is the nationalists, and people like Trump and a few other figures who stand up for example, right-wing populism at the moment. I think is the main engine for I guess the good guys at the moment. That's obviously the side I'm interested in.
Well, I wanted to just draw attention to the fact that, first of all, these demonstrations, these riots, why? I've got two questions or two observations. First of all, why are people in England, in continental Europe, in New Zealand, in Australia, why are they demonstrating or rioting about something that happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota? Most of them probably don't know where that is, and I mean, I don't blame them for not knowing where that is, because I don't, you
You
know,
don't know yourself.
I don't, I know myself, but it's because it's in my own country, but I don't know where places are, halfway across the world for me.
Yes.
But first of all, it's just there's something just so incoherent or just so out of bounds or suggesting artificiality to me about that people are getting artificially riled up, or that maybe there are. I suspect resources put behind it, rent-a-mobs being
Yeah, well, it's definitely
placed in places.
it's definitely
And
being artificially riled up. That's clear. It was artificially riled up here. It happened through ABC, which is like the state media, which is like the equivalent of the BBC. Now, obviously, the globalist cabal does not own the ABC, nor does it own the BBC in the UK. But for whatever reason, it's decided to go along with this globalist agenda. And you can always tell. For example, if you watch, say, Tucker Carlson or something on Fox that's along that variety of news, you know that's something with a right-wing kind of leaning bias. And then you can always tell when something has this kind of globalist bias. And so, we definitely had a whole bunch of media in Australia pushing that, and that mobilised some supporters, and away they went. And they said there's been 300 or 400 Aboriginal deaths in custody, and that's true, there had been, but there's been like 2,000 or 3,000 white deaths in custody, probably more than that. There's only ever a crime when it happens to a black person, and it could maybe be implied that maybe a white person was involved, though no one knows why there are Aboriginal deaths in custody. I mean, these things have happened because maybe I don't think Aboriginals like to be locked up. I don't think a lot of them commit suicide.
Well, the second thing I wanted to say was, as far as the cause, the reason for these riots, it's become utterly incoherent, if it was ever coherent in the first place, because, okay, compared to, say, the Rodney King riots that happened predominantly in California in the early 90s. There you could say, well, people got pissed off because these officers, in this case, there was a court case in which they were found to be not guilty, and people didn't like the verdict. So they were responding to the verdict. In this case, they responded to this apparent event that took place where this man apparently was killed improperly, obviously, by a police officer. But then the police officer was arrested. The Minneapolis city council voted to defund the police. They did all these kinds of things. They've responded to the problem, and yet the riots continue. So in that sense, it's become incoherent. If it's about George Floyd and what happened to him, well, and wanting justice for it, steps have been taken, and yet they're still
but it's not about that, and that's obvious, and that's the thing. It's a kind of hysteria, and that's why I think comparisons to the Red Guard and the Cultural Revolution, because it should be remembered that Mao, originally backed the Red Guard when obviously he used them to solidify his power in the late 60s in China, but also too, you should remember once Mao wound up the Red Guard, he couldn't stop them. Basically, they continued to intimidate even Mao's own supporters into the mid-70s, to the point where he had to crack down on them. Because basically, when you wind up this kind of thing, it's hard to shut down. I think that's what the elite have done. They've wound up the kind of racial animosity, I guess, amongst black people, and also the worst people in this have been white liberals, small L white liberals. They're all over Facebook promoting it. No, it's so much to be done. I mean, for example, in America, that there are way more black people are killed by other black people in Chicago and places like that. There's countless, and it's so obvious this is not actually about black lives, and that's why it's just another media manipulation, and it's the cabal at work yet again, promoting their evil. In the U.S. media, it's just fucking ridiculous.
So, Richard, you don't think that Black Lives Matter, the organisation, is actually advocating for things that are good for black people, like resisting arrest and committing crime generally?
If they were interested in actual, black problems, they would deal with all the various problems that face the black community. They would talk about black on black crime. They would talk about, fatherless home, things that Candace Owens talks about. She really sums it up very well. All the various problems with Black Lives Matter. Just watch one of her videos online.
They would actually give black people a few tips on how to deal with police officers when they are stopped for some reason.
I've been pulled over in the United States by a police officer for driving. I don't know. I think maybe I was parked somewhere incorrectly. Let me tell you, I'm white. I'm a middle-aged white guy, and I was so polite to the two white cops who pulled me over. I was, yes, sir. I showed my hands. I was extremely calm. Now, I'm like that also in Australia with police. And Australia police hardly ever shoot anybody. But sometimes they do shoot people. So whenever I'm confronted by a police officer, I'm calm. I keep my hands steady. I make sure I don't get angry with them. Even if I have a problem, if I may be arguing with them, I'll just, officer, do you think, and you keep it calm. And you never see that amongst black people. They behave, what the fuck's going on here, motherfucker? And it's like, they're like.
Well, I think the problem is that the problem seems to be that black people in America have too much privilege, so that when they're stopped by a lowly white police officer, they're actually deeply offended that somebody who's so low down the pecking order has deigned to pull them over for some minor infraction like being drunk or drugged up in charge of a vehicle.
Exactly.
So,
extraordinary.
And this sort of attitude is being inculcated in black people by Black Lives Matter. And so if you're going around saying how wonderful black people are, how oppressed they've been, how evil the cops are, how you should always fight the police, resist the police, how these streets are our streets, you're sending out these messages. These are all messages designed to get more and more black people killed. And then that kind of leads to a kind of cycle where more and more black people get angry or excited or het up, and also more and more emotionally incontinent white liberals also get sucked up into this big swirl of emotion. And then
it's all about division, isn't it?
And then it's divisive, and then also you eventually that starts to trigger a lot of conservative or nationalistic white people. They then sort of start tweeting or saying things, and sometimes occasionally protesting or counter-protesting, like we saw with the Football Lads Alliance in London. And then it just keeps the whole pot bubbling away, and it just adds to the atmosphere of chaos and instability. And when you've got an election year, that could be very, very interesting. It can be very, very useful to certain political candidates. And
obviously, like Joe Biden is a terrible candidate to run against run against Donald Trump. And
no, actually, he's the perfect candidate because he's so old and he's so dead and he's so boring. Yeah. He's like, it's like it reminds me of Aesop's fable in reverse, the fable about the stork and the log. First of all, I think the frogs want a king, and so they ask Jupiter, can we have a king? And Jupiter, he just kind of wants to humor them. So he says, that floating log in your pond, that shall be your king. And then the frogs are great. We've got a king, but this king doesn't do anything. He's boring. He just just lies there floating on the water. And so they go back to Jupiter and they say, actually, Jupiter, thanks for giving us a king and all that, but this king's a bit boring. Can we have a more exciting king? And so Jupiter decides to teach them a lesson, and he sends them a stork to be their king. And of course, a stork is symbolic of a kind of tyrannical emperor. And he immediately starts eating a lot of the frogs. And the frogs learn the lesson. And so instead of accepting the stork as their king, they ask to have King Log back. And, in this kind of analogy, Trump represents that kind of, he's an exciting leader, but he's also a leader that the mainstream media, the establishment, has successfully associated with chaos. And so a lot of people might be feeling a bit jaded with the way America is now. You've got this bloody coronavirus lockdown, you've got these bloody riots. And so they're sort of like, they're in a state of fatigue with all this excitement. And so they're actually going to find somebody like boring old Joe Biden with his kind of corny old charm quite reassuring. This is like a return to normality.
No, I think you're right. That's exactly what they've done, and that's a deliberate strategy because I don't think they could run anyone against Trump. I don't think they worked that out themselves. And you've got to remember too that the virus started as soon as impeachment ended. As soon as the impeachment thing against Trump finished, the coronavirus began to spread inside Western civilization almost immediately. Within a week, that began, if you look at the timeline of that. So it's quite extraordinary. And that's why it's all aimed at Donald Trump. And I do agree with you absolutely there, Colin, and I'm sure Andy probably agrees as well, that it's a kind of ladling on of chaos and catastrophe that even to someone like myself who's a Trump supporter, it's kind of wearying. You know what I mean? It's like, but there's another part of you that thinks really they hate Donald Trump this much that they will release a bioweapon or at least create some kind of virus catastrophe that they'll over-exaggerate, and then they'll start a race, right? And God knows what, there's another 3 or 4 months to the election left. They've got another 3 or 4 months to cause all kinds of havoc. So yes, there is a kind of fatigue that comes with it, and I do think that it's something I guess we have to resist. Because I do think somehow Donald Trump represents freedom. You know what I mean? Just the way he's hated so impassionately. He clearly must be doing something fucking right. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, so this suggests that there is a bit of a split at the top between various members of the American elite, but it seems to be that most of the elite are united against Donald Trump. I would say maybe 10 to 20% might support Donald Trump.
Yes.
But that depends on how things go. And there's about 60 to 80% who are kind of completely against him and who think he's the wrong person and who think, this is somebody we have to get rid of somehow, or we've got to constrain him by constantly bringing up all these kind of fake psyop operations to keep the Trump administration constantly off balance, to stop it connecting with the people, to stop the Trump administration becoming a truly populist regime.
Of course, because it's basically, he had African American unemployment down to the lowest levels ever, and that was at the beginning of 2020, right? And then what do? First of all, they wreck the economy, which brings African American unemployment up to the highest levels ever after 2 months of the coronavirus. And then, of course, they bring in the race riots when everyone's been locked up in their homes, is itching to get out and cause a bit of trouble, at least to go out and get drunk or do something. And then they open the door for the potential for a race riot. And then there it is. It's such an obvious manipulation by the elite, media elite, and the usual elites in the United States. And it goes to show that, how Donald Trump must legitimately be some kind of threat to them.
Yeah, Andy, is that how it seems in America then?
Well, I was going to say that even now, even according to the polls, Trump has an unprecedented level of support among blacks compared to other Republican presidents and presidential candidates, which is interesting, an interesting kind of thing to note.
He was very pro-black community. He was giving them jobs. He was giving the actual community back its dignity. And that's what, of course, really annoyed the Democrats, because the Democrats have relied on keeping the black community in a kind of welfare trap, you know what I mean? And then they'll blame it on hate whitey. They're basically doing the old formula of get poor white people to hate poor black people and get poor black people to hate poor white people. And as long as they never look up and see us, the greedy vampires at the top who run Washington, who run the media, who run Wall Street, that's the thing. That's the game. That's exactly what's playing out in America right now. And if the rioters were to stop, even the ones in England, if Tommy Robinson were to stop with the head of Black Lives Matter in the UK and look up at the media vampires, and then you'd really have some progress. And that's, of course, what they're afraid of. Black and white unity. And that's what we should be preaching on a fucking show like this. That's what's hilarious. All my friends on the new right, they've all been preaching calm amongst all this, calm, and everyone should get along and brotherly love, and people have been putting up quotes by fucking Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I've been doing it myself. And then everyone on the left is screaming for a race riot like they're members of the Ku Klux fucking Klan. That's where we're at right now. And it's ridiculous.
And I would also say, my approach to everything that's going on right now, I'm sure that party politics have some relevance, but I try to see things in a wider scope with a wider picture that really transcends. Somebody will get elected in November, but regardless of that, it's not like we're all going to be saved or we're all going to be lost because of who gets elected in November. I think that what has been going on now, for example, the virus, the pushing of this stay at home, social distance. This was perpetrated. It has been perpetrated. It is being perpetrated in countries across the world. This is like a world event.
Of course, it is, yes.
And what they're pushing now with the race riots is also. I mean, it's happening in America, yes, but it's also happening in countries that like what the hell is it? How is this relevant in Sydney, Australia,
it's
or
all global, isn't it? And why would that be?
New Zealand or whatever. I think there's a place for looking at it with regard to party politics, but there's also a way in which we have to look at it as like this is some long-term, and maybe this clashes with your notion of things, Colin, and to some degree, if you think this is just chaos, stuff is just happening and no one's really making anything happen. I mean, I think that there is some kind of plan or goal or notion of steering things in a particular direction, but I don't by certain powerful people, and I don't think that.
We all know who it is. We all know who it is. Colin and Andy, you know who it is. I know who it is. We can't say it. You know what I mean? It's these same motherfuckers all the fucking time. It's the globalists. That's why it's global, because it's the globalists. The same with the virus. The same with the race hate agenda and whatever bullshit.
Yeah, I hear you, Richard, but I just can't accept that, because we're in a situation where basically, I mean, if you accept the theory that it's the globalists, we're in a situation where the globalists are creating the conditions where white countries are becoming extinct. Really, they're becoming colonized by third world population.
That's the plan. Yes,
okay. I know this is the plan, and this is why I don't believe it. Because if I was a rich billionaire globalist, I wouldn't want to turn Switzerland into Somalia.
Well, Switzerland has not quite become Somalia yet, and obviously there's a few nations, a few white nations they're leaving alone, and that haven't fully experienced the full gift. For example, it's interesting the way Sweden didn't lock down. Sweden's always been a country favoured by the globalists, even though it's had a lot of multiculturalism. But the country didn't lock down; it kind of stayed open, and that didn't have the economic catastrophe that many of.
Yeah, but we're talking about the big trends. The big trends are, fall in fertility in Western countries, Western women going out to work, discovering themselves, forgetting to have children and families, the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of traditional culture, the population constantly being topped up by train loads and boat loads of immigrants from the third world, the demographics of a death camp. Ultimately, that leads to the whole of Europe, the whole of North America, the whole of Australia becoming a simulacrum of Somalia, Sudan, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. I mean, any globalist who is doing this on purpose would be certifiably insane. Why would you want to destroy these great countries where you are the kingpin, where your money really works for you, where you can have anything you want, and in a well-run, orderly society which can offer you every kind of luxury and pleasure, and then replace that with effectively a shanty town from the third world?
Well, that is a fair point, and it does. I do think that the globalists are insane, and I think that's one of the things about them why their plan will fail, because their plan is insane. It's kind of like Blofeld or like some kind of like Bond villain taken to like Soros and all that school of Davos and everything.
Yeah. But if you're insane, you don't have a plan, because insanity is a contradiction of having a plan. When you have a plan, there's a rationality to it. There's a goal that you actually benefit from. That's what a plan is. And if you don't have that, if you're just doing things that are going to bring down the world in flames, then it's very, very hard to have a plan. So this idea that they're the elite of these kind of twisted Bond villains are quite happy to see the world burn because of something that happened to them in childhood, or kind of potty training trauma or whatever. That just I'm not really buying that. I'm sorry to say.
Colin, your view of the world is that it's chaotic, right? That it's chaotic and no one's really in charge. Well, in a sense, that's not really far from my particular vision. I'm saying that the globalists are attempting to do this. They're meeting, obviously, with natural and organized resistance from our nations. because who don't particularly want to rush towards the edge of the cliff as fast as they do. And that essentially explains the kind of no one is in charge at the moment, because you've got two groups. One wants to rush towards the cliff, the other is saying, let's slow down a little bit. And no one's particularly in charge because two groups are kind of at loggerheads. That really actually matches with your
There's
vision.
probably a lot more than two groups. There's nobody in charge because you have all these clash in interests, clash in ethnicities, clash in nationalities, clash in economic interests.
Sure.
Everybody's taking a rather short-term view. They're thinking about immediate profit rather than how things are going to pan out. They're not creating long-lived societies. And the only people that seem to be taking a long-term view, I would say, would be people like the Chinese, where they don't have to worry about the election cycle, where everything isn't focused on the stock market, where they do seem to be working successfully to make their countries stronger and stronger. We're going to see a situation where countries that rely upon Western-style democracy, which, by the way, isn't even democracy, it's a kind of parasitical party system, where countries that rely upon that system will become weaker and weaker, and countries that don't, like China, where you have an established cadre that has a long-term vision, those kind of countries will become stronger and stronger.
So are you speaking out in favor of China here? Should we all just basically bow down and accept the Maoist boot?
No, of course not. I think we should create a situation in the West where we have our own cadres with a vision and a long-term view of things that is designed to achieve the goals and the aims and the interests of our own people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd agree with that as well. And I do think, though, there's obviously always been the argument about demographics in Western civilization, but I always point out the globalists themselves. The globalists are always a tiny elite. They're less than 1% of the world's population. They're a tiny elite, and our own demographics are falling, even inside our own countries. But we're pretty cunning and we're pretty manipulative. So I think we can operate in a sense the way the globalists do. We can continue to maintain our hegemony over our countries through cunning and manipulation and stuff. But I don't think the demographic problem will affect our own power with our own countries as long as we play it smart. That's my opinion.
Well, I think that a good way to perhaps wrap up this conversation on a lighter note is, and this is something I was talking to y'all about before we started recording, a consequence of what's going on right now and with the riots and with the in some cities the police just sort of abdicating and letting the rioters run riot and letting the cities burn, which is of course a very grim circumstance. But one thing that's happened that I find I get some mirth out of is what's taken place in Seattle with this area called Chaz. And it's 6 blocks in size, and it's now its own autonomous country. It's declared its independence from the United States. There's a sign up saying you are now leaving the United States, and it's Antifa country, and so they're growing their own crops or trying to or something like that. It's pretty hilarious, and apparently our old friend Richard Spencer is down with it. What's happened is there's this a guy who's taken over the land of Chaz, who's the warlord of Chaz, and Richard Spencer, the former, according to the media, the leader of the alt-right, and he's written these fawning tweets to this guy. I don't have them in front of me right now, but.
It's a very amusing occurrence, and it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out in a way, because this is a kind of portrait of what Antifa and Black Lives Matter would like for America. So obviously the disaster that's coming to Chezestan is going to be a very salient lesson for everybody. I imagine Richard Spencer has praised it because he's a lunatic, and people say that people aren't crazy in this world. I mean, people are definitely crazy who are major figures in this world. So I wouldn't discount that. Obviously, is it based on those ideas, Andy, of what's the name of that thinker? He wrote a book called Taz, isn't it? Theoretical Autonomous Zone. Is that right? For Herkenbay? Is that the guy's name? I think it's based on the writings of a guy called Hickam Bay, and it was about creating these little autonomous zones. And I do think there's something interesting about it. Tucker Carlson has done a couple of really interesting kind of recordings on it, so you should look those up on Fox News. And let's just see how it plays out. I'm looking forward to the tanks rolling in basically and crushing it. But I mean, there's threats. There's been talk of the Hell's Angels going up there on July the 4th and shutting it down. So I don't think it'll last long. And either Donald Trump will shut it down, or maybe the bikies will.
Anyway, Richard wrote a kind of very, very heartfelt tribute to Raz Simone, this black pimp, I think, who seems to have appointed himself leader of the Capitol Hill Autistic Zone.
Am I still on?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. So I've got these tweets in front of me now. So his name is Raz Simone, and Richard Spencer tweeted a few very effusive things about him. First of all, this is on June 11th. Raz Simone, I can only salute you. You instinctly, that's not a word, it should be instinctively, but whatever. You instinctively grasped the legitimacy crisis at the heart of America and the white world in general. And while others pontificated, you acted and engaged in what can only be called political creativity. Okay. Then he goes on to say, nations that are proud and strong would have crushed your revolution in the blink of an eye, but you sniffed out America's weakness and world weariness. You called our bluff, and for that I have the utmost, sincerest respect. All right. And then he goes on to say, don't listen to the white liberals who want to recreate the old world. Listen to your heart. This is, again, to Raz Simone, the warlord of Chaz. Yeah. Listen to your heart. Never fear your own ambition and will to power. You motivate every man who seeks to be a dreamer in the daytime, who seeks to build a new world in the wreckage of the old. And then finally he ends with, Hail Raz.
Well, he's kind of like involved in a kind of, Alexander Duginism there, Alexander Dugin, he is obviously very fond of aspects of the far right, but he's also really quite fond of aspects of the revolutionary far left as well. And he's interested in anybody who's interested in destroying liberalism, small L liberalism, and also globalization and globalism. So, you can see a kind of Duginism coming out there with Richard Spencer. And obviously,
what is Duginism? What is Duginism? To me, it seems that Duginism is just trying to set one group in a Western country against another group, and this is a strategy that is very, very blatant. If you watch a channel like Russia Today, they're always trying to set one group off against another, as long as it's in what they regard as an enemy country. And so,
well, really, I mean, I think that what was I going to say? I think that the globalists are the ones who are interested in setting one group against another. I think that someone like Dugin is interested in different kinds of radical politics, and that he's interested in right-wing radical politics and left-wing, because he's interested in radicalization. He's not interested in the norm. And obviously, an event like Chaz, from a far left perspective, it is a kind of radical far left event. It is interesting from that perspective. It's obviously going to be a complete disaster, in my opinion. But you can also see someone like Richard Spencer looking at it and almost feeling jealous that he couldn't do something like that. And also, can you imagine if Richard Spencer tried to do something like that, and how quickly that would be shut down? Can you imagine if the people at Charlottesburg had, cordoned off a 6-block perimeter and somehow managed to start their own little white nationalist nation? How quickly would have that been shut down? The tanks would have been rolling, even with Donald Trump as president. The tanks would have rolled through that within a fucking 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what we're seeing. This is happening not because Raz Simone is some revolutionary character. It's because he's been given permission, and the other people who are. I mean, it's not really all about him. He's just one character. I doubt that he's actually completely in charge of Chaz. I don't think anybody's in charge of Chaz, and this has been allowed to happen. I think probably what the people who are in charge of Chaz are key players in the Democratic Party, and this is kind of like a staged show to undermine the Trump presidency. They're doing this.
Yes.
It seems to me to be a kind of bait. to infuriate Trump and to make him look weak. And it's very, very difficult for him to actually act and do something because, the city authorities and the state authorities are completely politically opposed to him. And so if he wanted to stamp this out, he would have to be incredibly heavy-handed, and that would just make him look bad and send out the wrong message as well, and lead to yet more chaos and more hysteria. This is round one of the Democrats' presidential campaign. Let's make Trump look like an ass by starting an anarchist commune that really triggers him.
You are quite right on many levels there, Colin, and I can definitely see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It seems like
back to Duginism. Why would Dugin be interested in all these kind of contradictory political movements? I mean, the obvious explanation is that that is to foment a degree of chaos in some particular political entity.
That is true, and that argument can be made. And probably to understand the theories of Alexander Dugin, you probably want to get him on. He'd probably speak to you. But I don't know. I mean, there are different reasons for it.
Well, I did speak to him a few years back. It was quite an interesting conversation. And, he was more about unifying Russian history because Russia is, on the one hand, you have this traditionalist Christian Orthodox Tsarist element, and on the other hand, you have this Bolshevik, communist element. And he seemed to be most interested in sort of creating a kind of peaceful synthesis between those two elements where they weren't actually at loggerheads. And this is something the Putin presidency also seems to be acting out. They're trying to respect every stage of their history. So they respect Tsarism, but they also respect Stalinism.
Yes, no, I see that as well. And that is definitely a part, I think, of what Dugin's interested in relation to Russia and in relation to strengthening Russian hegemony. And I do think it's an interesting idea. That's maybe something we could borrow from that, to respect.
Yeah, because Duginism is basically like minimize your own conflicts and contradictions and maximize the conflicts and contradictions of your enemies. And in the case of Dugin, that's obviously this kind of neoliberal world order centered on the American kind of hegemon.
Yes, that's true.
Colin, what do you think is what do you think is Richard's what is his gambit here? What do you think he's doing with these tweets? Do you have any idea?
Look at me, I'm over here. Don't forget about me. I'm Richard Spencer. It's just, Richard's a funny guy.
Why just fawn over this one particular person so embarrassingly?
Well, he's gone increasingly to. I mean, a lot of people, not just him, a lot of people in the kind of rump alt-right, as I call it, they've gone increasingly to the Nazbol position, and so this is not unexpected. This is not like anything out of the ordinary. Richard Spencer has been drifting leftwards ever since he broke up with his wife Nina and started this relationship with this liberal left-wing Satanist woman. I forget her name.
It's just kind of funny. Everything about this whole Chaz situation is so amusing, and I agree with you. I agree with you that Trump, if Trump is dumb to be take the bait and get infuriated over it and say, you need to stop this right now or else, because it's beautiful propaganda against the stupidity of the far left. I mean, it just makes them look so ridiculous.
I agree.
You should just not
interrupt them. You should let it play out, because it will be such a disaster, and it will be such a kind of preview of what the Dems haven't offered, that he might just get over the line in November if he just lets it play out. So there you go.
That's assuming the media present it in a way that is advantageous to Trump, and of course we know they're not going to do that. If something bad happens in Chaz, the media are going to memory hole it. Whereas if nothing bad happens, they're going to kind of present it as a kind of summer of '67 hippie commune kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. Well, boys, this is the chaos. This is 2020. This is where we're at, ladies and gentlemen.
I was just going to sum it up by saying that there's been obviously a lot going on, and one fears that things will get even more heated and more intense. And it's already kind of giving me a headache. But we get the impression that hopefully we're all still in one piece by the end of 2020. But at this point, I'm not sure. I think all bets are off.
Andy, you're ready for you Americans. You're all ready for Sleepy Joe and bedtime.
You'll come and tuck you in. You'll come and tuck you in and give you a good night kiss. So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. One thing about Biden is, I mean, he's not hateable the way that Hillary Clinton was. I mean, I don't like him, but he's just that's one thing in his favor is that there's something kind of benign seeming about him that, even though I don't like him, I can't just get worked up against him the way I could against Trump's former opponent. So we'll see if that works in his favor.
That's what they're hoping for. They're hoping that'll work for him, so we'll wait and see. But, I'm still a Trump man, so I'm going to, I guess, continue to back Trump until the last ballot is voted or the last ballot is rigged. So, boys, It's good talking to you. Yes, and buckle up. This year is only half over. So, according to, maybe they've got just as much catastrophe to happen in the next 5 months. So buckle up, lads.
All right. Well, this is Andy Nowicki with Colin, Liddell, and Richard Wolstencroft signing off for another Affirmative Right Roundtable podcast. Thanks for listening.